My wife went to the couple's party with her boss. In secret. The excuse she gave me that night was that she needed to stay late to review an important presentation for the company's board. I believed her. Not because I'm naive, but because I chose to trust. Because that was the basis of everything we'd built: trust, partnership, loyalty. So I didn't ask. I didn't check the calendar, I didn't check the GPS, I didn't suspect the new outfit, the over-the-top perfume, the heels she didn't normally wear to work. I simply wished her a good night, kissed her on the cheek, and went about my business. If I'd known what I'd find a few hours later, maybe I would have had the courage to lie to myself a little longer. Just one more day. But fate has a cruel way of rubbing truths in our faces when we least expect it. A couple of friends called me, asking if I was still going to the club's celebration party. I hadn't heard of any party. Surprised, I got in the car and went. I didn't want to suspect anything. I just wanted to understand why she hadn't told me about it. When I entered the hall, my eyes scanned the crowded, lively space, with laughter, couples dancing, people talking, toasting, until my eyes met hers. She laughed loudly at something the man beside her said. A wide, confident, free laugh. Too free. And then she saw me. Her laughter died on her face. She froze like a broken statue. Time between us stopped. There was only our eyes, exchanging silence. Not a word was spoken. No explanation, no apology. I simply turned and left everything behind. Everything. That night, as I closed the car door, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat, silently tearing my heart apart. In the days that followed, she tried. She called. She texted. She showed up at the door. She said it was a mistake, that she was confused, that things weren't what they seemed. But they were. That party, that smile she gave her boss, the way her body leaned into him as if seeking refuge. That was a choice. And in choosing, she had already lost me. People think betrayal is in the kiss. In the touch. In the hidden sex. But betrayal starts before that. It starts in the silence. In the secret. In the smile kept for another. In the absence of guilt. In the hesitation to tell the truth. She had already chosen when she lied to me that night. She had already betrayed me when she thought I didn't deserve to know. It wasn't the party that destroyed me. It was everything she hid before that. And the strangest thing is that, after all this, she was left with nothing. The charming boss. He was just an empty man. No promises, no plans, no depth. She found herself alone. Lost between regret and the emptiness that remained. And me? I rebuilt. It was slow, it was hard. There were nights when sleeping felt like torture. I felt anger, then sadness, then just a great emptiness. But one day, I met someone. Someone who didn't lie about where she was. Who didn't hide her phone when I approached. Who laughed with me like someone who wanted to build, not just have fun. She offered me something I no longer remembered existed: tranquility. Loyalty. A life without games, without excuses. A kind of love that was simple but complete. And it was there, with her, that I realized I'd never had this before. Not with someone who betrayed me. I had love, yes. But it was a tired love. A love that was constantly being tested. A love that needed to be watched, interpreted, tested constantly. With this new person, everything was light. Years passed. One day, I saw her again. The woman I once called my love, who slept beside me for so many nights, who was my haven, and my downfall. She appeared at the door of a cafe where I was having lunch with my new partner. She was alone. Her eyes were filled with something I knew well: pain. When our eyes met, there was a moment of silence in the world. She said nothing. But the request for forgiveness was there, clear, hanging in her eyes. I simply nodded. A small gesture. Simple. But full of everything that couldn't be put into words. I forgave her then and there. But forgiveness didn't bring reconciliation. It brought freedom. Because forgiveness isn't a bridge back, it's a doorway. Each went their own way. She with what she lost. I with what I found. But what no one knows, what almost no one saw, was what came next. When she, for the first time, tried to win me back. When she wrote letters. When she showed up at my door saying, I know I was wrong. But I still love you. When she cried and said it had just been a moment, a mishap, a weakness. When she confessed that she had never stopped thinking about me. And me? I looked into her eyes. For a long time. I saw everything we'd lived, everything we'd lost. I felt the bitter taste of everything that never returns. And I replied, without anger, without pain, without hope, you were the love of my life. But it's over. The silence that followed was more devastating than any scream. She left, and this time, she didn't come back. Some people think betrayal heals with time. But time doesn't heal what's broken by choice. It only transforms. It transforms love into memories, pain into distance, and the betrayed, into someone who never returns. But what few know, what almost no one saw, is what happened after that. Because sometimes, the true climax of a betrayal story, isn't in the pain of the moment, but what happens when the betrayer tries to return, and finds the door closed, and that's where true emotional justice takes hold. Not with revenge. But with indifference. Not with anger. But with peace. And it was on that day, at that exact moment, with her in front of me, her eyes filled with tears, saying, give me one more chance, that something unexpected happened. Something she could never have imagined. Welcome to the channel. Here, no form of betrayal is romanticized or justified. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but the feelings are real, because betrayal, in real life, destroys bonds, erodes trust, and changes destinies forever. Our purpose is clear, to show, with intensity and truth, how a wrong choice can cost you the love of your life. Get ready, because what's coming next is a powerful, intense, and absolutely heartbreaking story. Shocking in the heart of a quiet neighborhood, with streets lined with trees that changed color with each season, lived a couple many considered the epitome of stability. Ethan and Clare had been together for almost a decade, and although time had changed many things, the glow of youth, the sleepless nights for good and bad reasons, the dreams that adapted to reality, there was still a silent connection between them that many admired and others secretly envied. They weren't perfect, far from it. But there was an unspoken agreement between them, a language built over the years, made of small gestures, discreet glances, and an intimacy that dispensed with words. Ethan was the kind of man who made everything seem simple. Calm, observant, with a quiet sense of humor and an almost ancient kindness. He was the kind of man who preferred to listen before speaking, who would make breakfast even when he was late, and who, even tired, made a point of asking how her day was. He worked as a financial consultant, and despite the heavy routine and increasing responsibilities, he never let work distance him from his life as a couple. He firmly believed that love was maintained in the details, in constancy, in respect. Claire, on the other hand, was intense. She carried in her eyes a restlessness that Ethan always found beautiful. She had big ambitions, a quick mind, and an energy that made everything around her move. She worked at a strategic marketing firm and rose quickly, occupying positions with competence and presence. She was admired, praised, surrounded by people, and yet, in quiet moments, she sometimes seemed to be searching for something she couldn't quite pinpoint. Ethan sensed this. There were days when she was with him, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Sometimes, it worried him. Other times, he simply accepted it as part of her nature, that restless spirit, that flame he couldn't always name. Their home was cozy, its walls decorated with travel photos, old notes, and mementos hanging like silent witnesses to a story built with time and affection. Dinners for two, binge-watching TV shows on the couch, silly arguments about where to order food or who would take out the trash. They had built a real life, far from the romantic ideal, but full of meaning. They had mutual friends, shared plans, trips they still wanted to take. And they also had their own spaces, their own individualities. Claire was more sociable, enjoying events and meeting new people. Ethan was more reserved, preferring small gatherings and familiar places. Despite their differences, they seemed to balance each other well. They complemented each other, or at least that was the feeling they gave to those who observed them. Over time, the two settled into a comfortable, predictable routine. There was affection in their gestures, complicity in their glances. But sometimes, comfort can hide small cracks. And although Ethan didn't want to see it, something in Claire had changed. She still kissed him in the morning, still hugged him when he came home from work, still told him she loved him. But the sparkle in her eyes wavered. Some nights she stayed on her phone longer, laughing to herself about something she didn't share. Other times, she said she was exhausted and went straight to the shower, to her room, to the silence. Ethan noticed, but preferred not to press. He believed that love was also made of space. That things weren't always okay, and that everything was just a phase. He believed that trust was more important than questioning. And he trusted her. Truly. Claire, for her part, struggled with mixed feelings. She knew she was loved, she knew she had a man of integrity, caring, and present by her side. But somewhere along the way, something inside her began to stir. Maybe it was the pressure of her career, the wear and tear of her routine, or a restlessness she couldn't name. She began to miss something she couldn't define. It wasn't a lack of love. It was a lack of novelty, of lightness, of feeling seen differently. Ethan saw her as a partner, a friend, a companion. But she, silently, sometimes longed to be desired as if she were new again. She wanted to feel someone looking at her with curiosity, not familiarity. It was a selfish need, perhaps, but real. And she didn't talk about it. She kept it to herself. She ignored it. But the feeling grew. Amidst this inner turmoil, life went on. Dinners, meetings, wedding anniversaries celebrated with a special meal or a quick trip. Ethan, always attentive, never failed to celebrate important dates. Claire, even torn inside, participated in everything with a smile, albeit sometimes a little distant. Close friends didn't notice anything wrong. Neither did family. It was as if everything was exactly where it should be. But Ethan, deep down, felt it. A silent intuition, like a cold draft coming through a crack in a closed window. Nothing he could pinpoint. Just a feeling that something had changed. Still, he kept betting on love. He kept believing that the emptiness was temporary. That she needed time. That, perhaps, they just needed to reconnect. He made surprises, suggested trips, prepared candlelit dinners. Sometimes she smiled tenderly, other times she seemed unsure how to react. And he, once again, backed off. He never insisted. Never demanded. Claire felt guilty for not feeling the same enthusiasm. And, at the same time, she thought it unfair to herself to pretend everything was fine. But she said nothing. She carried on, like someone waiting for their heart to reorganize itself. The problem is that the heart, when not listened to, starts screaming inside. And it was at this point in the story that the small absences began to appear. Last-minute commitments, schedule changes, extended meetings. Ethan didn't suspect. He trusted. Because that's what love was for him. It was not questioning every gesture, it was not constantly investigating every move. It was believing that, if something was wrong, they would talk. But Claire didn't talk. She just distanced herself a little more each day. And this, even without him consciously realizing it, began to leave its mark on him. The once calm and confident man began to experience longer periods of silence, sleepless nights, thoughts that came and went without explanation. Even so, he remained steadfast. He made breakfast. He sent loving messages. He waited for replies that took longer than before. He kept flowers in the fridge to surprise her on any given Wednesday. He believed, with an almost childlike faith, that everything would fall into place. Claire, inside, was torn. Conflicted. She knew he didn't deserve doubts. That he didn't deserve half of a love. But she also didn't know how to let go of what was beginning to grow in a different direction. And it wasn't a new love, not yet. It was just a desire to feel different, to experience another version of herself. An impulse she thought she could control. Meanwhile, life went on. The house remained in order. The portraits remained hanging. Birthdays were celebrated. Friends came and went. And there, in the middle of it all, two hearts that once beat in unison now began to pulse at different rhythms. And neither of them had the courage to say it out loud. Not yet. Because sometimes it's easier to hold on to a comfortable truth than to face the pain of a reality that threatens to crumble everything one has built. And Ethan believed, with all his strength, that love, true love, would always find a way back home. Little did he know that, in some stories, not every lost love finds its way back. And that when a deep connection is lost by choice, by silence, or by ego, perhaps the greatest punishment isn't being left, but being forgotten. It was a gray, muggy afternoon, the kind where the air seems heavier than the silence itself. Ethan walked slowly down the sidewalk, feeling that something inside him had finally settled into place. The turmoil that had once consumed him, the doubt, the anger, the hurt, had now transformed into a strange, almost melancholic serenity. The months had passed like a flood that sweeps away everything and leaves only the essential. He had patiently rebuilt his life. He had learned to be alone, to silence what hurt, to recognize himself again in the mirror. And, without realizing it, he had become someone more whole. When he thought of Claire, the name no longer hurt as it once did. It was a memory, not a wound. But that afternoon, when he arrived home, he found an envelope on the table. No return address, no stamp, just his name, handwritten. He recognized the handwriting immediately. His heart, for a moment, skipped a beat. He opened the envelope calmly, but his hands trembled. Inside, a letter. Long, written in blue ink, the words marked by regret and urgency. He took a deep breath and began to read. The first lines were hesitant. She said she needed to explain herself, that silence weighed more heavily than guilt, that the truth needed to be told, even if it was too late. She asked to meet him, saying there was something she'd never had the courage to say. Ethan considered ignoring her. But something in that letter, perhaps the tone of desperation, perhaps the weight of a belated confession, made him agree. The next night, she showed up. Claire was different. Time seemed to have passed unevenly over her. Her eyes, once steady, held a gentle sadness. Her face had the weary lightness of someone carrying regrets. When she entered, there was no perfume, no makeup. Just an almost humble, vulnerable presence. Ethan watched her silently, sitting at the table where they had dined so many times. She took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "Thank you for having me," she began, her voice shaking. "I know I have no right to be here. But I needed to see you. I needed to tell you what I never could before." Ethan kept his gaze steady, serene, but there was something beneath that calm, a firm control, the kind of peace that comes after a storm. "What did you come all this way for, Claire?" he asked neutrally. "To make me relive what took me so long to bury." She lowered her head, her hands clasped together on the table. "No. I came because the silence haunts me. And because you deserve to hear it from me." That night, the party, she paused, gathering courage. "I lied to myself, to you, to everyone. I said it was a mistake. But it wasn't. It was a choice. And it was the worst one I've ever made. Ethan didn't answer. He just watched her, letting the words find their own way. Claire continued. I thought I was unhappy, that something was missing between us, and I mistook that lack for the end. I wanted to feel something new, and I ended up destroying everything that was already true. That man, he never loved me. And after you left, I realized nothing made sense. I tried to move on, but the absence of what we had devoured me inside. She took a deep breath and looked at him, her eyes welling up. I thought if I told you all this, maybe there would still be a piece of what we were. That maybe you could truly forgive me. Ethan rested his elbows on the table, staring at her. Do you want forgiveness? He asked quietly. Or do you want relief from the guilt you carry? Claire hesitated. I want you to know that I regret it. That I would give anything to take it back. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment before answering. The problem is, life doesn't come back, Claire. And what we break, even if it sticks together, is never the same. I spent nights trying to understand what I did wrong, trying to figure out where I lost you. Today I understand, I wasn't the one who lost you. You were the one who let me slip away. She wiped away her tears, trying to control her crying. I know. I destroyed something I'll never find again. Silence fell between them, thick. Outside, the wind blew softly, bringing the distant sound of footsteps on the sidewalk. Claire broke the silence. I know you're with someone. I heard from friends. I saw a picture, you two looked happy. Ethan nodded slowly. She brought me peace. And I learned that peace is more valuable than passion. Claire took a deep breath, tears welling up again. She's everything I wanted to be for you. She is everything you chose not to be, he replied, without rancor, but with cutting honesty. She lowered her eyes, and for a moment, she looked more fragile than ever. What if I told you I still love you? He asked in a whisper. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. I would believe it, he said calmly. But that doesn't change anything. She looked up, surprised at his calm. How can you say that like that? After everything? Because the love I felt for you was real, he replied, but it died the day I saw it wasn't enough for you. And when love dies, what's left is respect. And that's what I'm offering you now. My respect. My forgiveness. But not my love. The words echoed in the air like a sentence. Claire closed her eyes, letting the tears flow freely. Ethan walked to the window, and stood there, staring out at the dark street. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of a chair being pushed back, the sound of her breath catching between sobs. Do you still think about me sometimes? He asked, in an almost childish tone. Ethan smiled slightly, without turning around. I do. Sometimes. But not the way you think. I remember what we experienced with fondness, not pain. And that's what keeps me going. She stood slowly, walking toward him. They stood side by side, but worlds apart. I never imagined I'd lose you like this, she said, her voice breaking. Neither do I, he replied, looking ahead. But losing you was the only way I could find myself. Claire looked at him with a mixture of admiration and despair. That calm, serene-spoken man was the same man who had once loved her intensely. But now he was a different man. A free man. A man who had learned that forgiveness isn't about getting back together, it's about freeing oneself. She wanted to say more, ask for more, but realized there was no more room for the past. She approached, reached out, and touched his arm, an almost symbolic gesture. If you ever miss me. She began, but didn't finish. Ethan turned to her, looked deep into her eyes, and replied, his voice both firm and sweet, you were the love of my life. But it's over. The sentence fell between them like the end of a song they both knew by heart. Claire closed her eyes and nodded slowly. She knew there was nothing more to say. She stood there for a few seconds, trying to register his presence one last time, and then turned silently. She walked to the door, and before leaving, she looked back. Ethan was still standing at the window, motionless. When the door closed, he took a deep breath. There was no relief, no sadness. Just a sense of closure, like someone finally understanding the meaning of their own path. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of thunder, and he smiled, remembering how many storms they had weathered together. But now, the storm was hers alone. And it was there, in that moment, that the true end happened, not on the day of the betrayal, not in the tears, not in the silent arguments, but in that final look, where she realized that the forgiveness she so desperately sought was not what she expected. Because he had forgiven her, yes. But forgiveness didn't bring reconciliation. It brought freedom. And his freedom was, paradoxically, her punishment. She left, carrying with her the weight of her choices and the memory of what could have been. He remained, his heart light, ready to begin again, because sometimes the deepest justice comes not from another's pain, but from the peace we find after surviving it. The days following their last meeting were silent, and in that silence rested all that remained between them. Nothing more would be said. No more attempts, no letters, no belated requests. What had been left behind was now definitively locked away, not out of hatred, but out of clarity. Ethan returned to his routine with a kind of lightness he had never experienced before. For the first time in a long time, there was no internal conflict, no constant attempt to save something that only he seemed to hold. There were, yes, scars. But scars don't hurt when they heal properly. And he had finally healed. In the months that followed, Ethan surrendered himself to a quiet life. He continued with his work, his simple habits, and the peace he'd found with someone who didn't make him constantly question himself. There were no games, no insecurity, no unspoken expectations. The woman he shared his life with was now discreet, yet intense in everything she did. Someone who understood the importance of silence and listening. Who didn't carry the past as a weapon, but rather as a learning experience. They were together without the need to prove anything to the world, without the pressure of maintaining an image. Just two adults, hurt by past experiences, but whole enough not to take out on each other what life had already taken. With her, Ethan found something he didn't know he was looking for, emotional stability. And more than that, he found reciprocity. Everything he gave, he received in return. If he'd once been betrayed, now he was seen. If he'd once been left aside, now he was a priority. And that difference wasn't measured in grand gestures, but in the small details, in the eyes that sought him out when he entered a room, in the attentive listening after a long day, in the certainty that the truth would always be the foundation. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was real love. And, for that very reason, it was enough. Claire, on the other hand, took a very different path. After that final conversation, she felt the definitive weight of the choice she'd made. The stark reality that some decisions are irreversible. She tried to move on, tried to rebuild, but there was no structure to lean on. Her friends, over time, drifted away, not out of judgment, but because they could no longer see her the same way. Her family, though present, fell silent when she mentioned Ethan's name, as if it were now a closed chapter. The relationships she tried to forge always seemed too shallow, too cold, too quick. No one looked at her the way he did. No one listened to her concerns with the same care. No one saw the value in her that he saw, even in her flaws. And she knew it. She began to live on memories. She kept a box with photos, letters, and small objects from their time together. From time to time, she opened them all and delved into what she had lost. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she smiled bitterly, sometimes she just stared into the void with the expression of someone still searching for answers that no longer exist. She had become a spectator of her own ruin, aware of every step that led her there. She no longer sought reconciliation. She already understood that it would not come. But what hurt most was not Ethan's absence, it was the absence of herself. Because she knew that, by betraying that love, she had also betrayed her own essence. That version of herself that was capable of loving truly, of building with surrender, of trusting without secrets. And that version, now, was buried under layers of regret. The years passed, as they do for everyone. Ethan continued building his new life. He married discreetly, in an intimate ceremony, with only a few friends and family. There was no ostentation, but there was truth. The woman he married didn't try to take up anyone else's space, she simply built a new space with him, from scratch. They had a daughter, and the day Ethan held her in his arms for the first time, he understood that the pain he'd experienced back then made sense in that moment. Because, if he hadn't been broken, he would never have learned to appreciate the details that now made up his new life. Everything made sense. The fall, the rebuilding, the forgiveness. Each step led him to that moment of fulfillment he never imagined he would feel again. Claire, for her part, watched it all from afar. Not intentionally. Just for the life of her life. A photo that appeared on the social media of mutual friends. A conversation in a hallway. A declined invitation to an event where he would be. She avoided it. Not out of shame, but because it hurt too much. And because she knew there was no place for her there anymore. She continued her career, reached important positions, had brief and intense relationships, but none that made her feel the way she once did. And, over time, she came to accept this as an inevitable reality. She carried the love she lost like someone carrying a scar that never quite heals. Some days were good, others not so much. At times, she even wondered if it had all been a dream. But there was always a detail, a smell, a song, a memory, that brought it all back. And the truth returned with her, she had it all. And lost it because of a choice. Time is relentless to those who don't know how to take care of what they have. It doesn't come back. It just moves on. And when you realize what you've truly lost, sometimes it's too late. Ethan didn't harbor anger. He didn't hold grudges. Just memories. And even those faded over the years. Because when you experience a new, true, and secure love, the past loses its weight. It becomes nothing more than a lesson. And that's what remained, a silent, profound, definitive lesson. Now, if you've made it this far, tell me, what did you think of this story? What feelings did you feel? Do you think Claire deserved a second chance? Or do you think Ethan did the right thing by moving on? Leave a comment, your opinion is very important. And of course, if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, take this moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. Here, every week, you'll hear stories that touch you deeply, stories that last. And let this be a reflection, betrayal doesn't just destroy marriages. It destroys trust, respect, and most importantly, the very identity of the betrayer. The greatest pain isn't being left. It's letting yourself be lost. And the truth is that those who trade the certain for the uncertain almost always learn the hard way the value of what they left behind. This channel does not support, romanticize, or justify any kind of betrayal. Here, we show the real consequences, because we believe that love, when it's true, deserves to be protected, and not jeopardized by momentary vanity. Now take a deep breath, because what you just heard was more than a story. It was a mirror. And sometimes, the reflection hurts.